your toes. Now with your left hand, reach out and grab your nose. Say yeah, do a high five with your friend. Up high, down low, too slow, let's go. Stomp your feet, jump up and down. Clap your hands and turn around. Reach your arms all the way to the sky, out to the sides like a bird about to fly. Say yeah, do a high five with your friend. Up high, down low, too slow, let's go.
Hey everybody, it's Rhonda from Bake Me Happy, and welcome to the channel. Today we are talking sourdough and why it doesn't have to be that difficult. I was getting so frustrated when I first started making sourdough. I couldn't get my starter to start. My loaves were coming out flat and dense, and I was just done. I just figured I'm never going to get this. But after watching multiple YouTube videos and doing multiple Google searches, I took bits and pieces from everything I was learning from all the sites and came up with a system that has worked for me, and I have had perfect loaves ever since. And I wanted to share that information with you. Please like, subscribe, and share the channel. I'd love to get this off the ground to show you my fails, my successes, maybe learn something, and also to show you what I'm baking in my micro bakery this week. Comment below if you have any suggestions that I might try to improve on anything that I do, and enjoy the video. So the beginning of a great loaf of bread is having good starter. This was the biggest frustrating thing for me, was trying to get the starter to start. I was using all-purpose flour and I couldn't get it to do anything. And finally I read where try feeding it whole wheat flour because it likes to feed on that better. So for the first 3 days, I did a 1-to-1-to-1 once a day. So I did, for the first day, I did 20 grams of spring water and 20 grams of whole wheat flour. Then the next day, I did 20 grams of that starter, 20 grams of spring water, 20 grams of whole wheat flour. And then the third day, same thing, 20 grams of starter, 20 grams of whole wheat flour, 20 grams of spring water. And then the fourth day is when I started twice a day feedings. So I would do 20 grams of the starter, 40 grams of the water, 40 grams of the whole wheat flour. Once I got my starter established, it was thick, stringy, bubbly. Then I started backing off on the whole wheat flour and replacing what I took out of the whole wheat flour with all-purpose flour to where I ended up with I was just using all-purpose flour. Whole wheat flour tends to make your sourdough more sour. And any discard that you use for other baked goods tend to be a little bit more on the sour side. And I just prefer using the all-purpose flour so it's not as sour. The discard, when you don't start saving your discard until after you have established your starter where it's airy, bubbly, and this is not the first couple of days. This is after. It took me a good 2 weeks to get my starter established to where it was making great loaves of bread. That's when you're ready to cook with it. And then I would start saving my discard, and I save it in the big bucket. If you see to the right, I have one of those that I keep in my refrigerator with a hard lid on it so it keeps it airtight. And I just put my discard in there, and I make cookies and muffins and fruit bars and really makes delicious baked goods. So don't waste your discard. What you're seeing now is I'm making my small little jar of starter that I keep on hand when I'm not baking bread. So it's 20 grams of starter, 40 grams of water, 40 grams of my all-purpose flour. And then I'll cover it with, I use the shower caps that I get off of Amazon. They're really cheap. You get a ton of them, and they're great to cover your bowls, cover your small jars. So I cover it with that, and then I put the little cloth top on top of the plastic. Also, here you can see I made a jar where it really overflowed, and the plastic tends to catch it so it doesn't get all over your counter. I was going to make more bread, so that's why I made a larger thing of starter. To the right, you see the larger container. That's where I'm making my levain. I used to try to follow levain recipes, and I never had enough to make a loaf of bread. And then I read where just double feed your starter. So what I do is I take whatever is in my starter jar. So I could take this, put it in my container, weigh it, and then just double the amount of water and flour I put in it. And then the next day or 12 hours later, I'm ready to use it for my autolyse to make my bread. So here I'm going to use this for my autolyse. I can make 2 loaves of bread from this. But the reason I keep a smaller jar of starter, I see where people keep larger jars or several of them, and that just wastes flour. So if you're not going to be using it, just take a couple of the 20 grams of starter, 40 of water, 40 of the all-purpose flour, and just keep that and feed that twice a day until you're ready to make bread, and then you start making larger amounts of it so you have enough to use as levain for your bread. Now, best thing I heard on a YouTube video was when you feed this, just look at it to see what you need to feed it. If it's really runny because you only fed it once a day, you forgot to feed it twice, it's hungry. Just add some flour. It doesn't need any more hydration. And then stir it so it becomes like a thick paste. And then in 12 hours, you're going to see it's bubbly, it's stringy. And then you can start your water and your flour along with it. So they said think of the flour as a vessel, not the flour, the water as a vessel, and your flour as the food. Also, you want to use spring water because if your tap water tends to be chlorinated, it will kill the yeast. So that makes it harder to start your starter. So in the next clip, you're going to see where I'm starting my autolyse. So I put the 2 videos together to make this a little longer, but all you're mixing is all bread flour and your water. I heat my spring water, it's 600 grams, to between 80 and 90 degrees because I want this to stay warm for 4 hours during bulk fermentation. And then I add 1,000 grams of the bread flour, and then I use my dough hook and I mix it until everything's incorporated, and then I'm going to cover it and let it rest from 30 minutes to an hour. Typically I let it rest for an hour, and then when I'm done I check the temperature of it and make sure that it's either above 80 degrees or under 80 degrees because that's going to determine my next water temp. So here I'm starting to mix my dough, and what I've done is I've added 20 grams of salt, fine sea salt, and I mixed it in, and then I added 220 grams of my levain or my souped up starter and started mixing it. And then I have 60 grams of water, and if my I check the temp of my dough before I add the water, and if it was greater than 80 degrees, then I didn't warm up the water. But if it was under 80 degrees, I warm up that 60 grams of water a little bit because I want my dough to be 80 degrees for at least 4 hours, if not above 80 degrees, while it's bulk fermenting. So you only add half the water. Sometimes I don't have to add any water, and sometimes I add all of the water, and then a lot of the times it's just half the water. I don't know what makes the difference, but it just plays out that way. Then I keep scraping down the bowl. But see in the center there, you can see it's starting to get less wet looking, and eventually all of it will be less um, wet looking. So you can see here it's starting to pull away from the bowl, get a little drier. So I can start adding half of my water. And at this point, if my dough, like I said, if my dough was less than 80 degrees, I do warm the water up a little bit. Normally it's not. And every time it starts to look dry like this, I just drizzle a little more water in it. Like I said, I don't want it to be not, really not hydrated. So I kind of gauge if it's dry on top, but it's still kind of mushy along the bottom of the bowl. I'm okay with that. But this is going to take 8 to 12 minutes, and then it's all going to be pulling away from the side of the bowl. And see how it's dry on top, like you could reach in and touch it, and it's just a little bit of a mush down on the bottom. As long as I still have that little mushy on the bottom, then I'm okay adding the rest of my water. But like I said, sometimes I don't have to add any water. Sometimes most of the time it's half of the water, and then every once in a while it's the whole entire 60 grams of the water. So here it's looking good. The bowl's pretty clean on the side. It's still hydrated on the bottom of the bowl, so I'm good with this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover it, and I'm going to let it rest for 30 minutes before I start my stretch and folds. So here I'm going to uncover it and start my first set of stretch and folds. So what I'm doing is I'm going to spritz my hand with water, because you never want to add flour to your hands or to your surface, because it's going to dry out your bread. So trust me, it won't stick to you. And what I'm doing is I'm pulling, stretching it, bringing it across. Pulling, stretching, bringing it across. I'm not pulling enough to where it tears it, but you can do a pretty good stretch before that happens. And I'm going all the way around it. Some people will do this until the bread doesn't give anymore and then cover it. I just do it until I get all the way around. Here's my second set of stretch and folds. Gonna spritz my hand, get up under that bread, and stretch and bring it across, and stretch and bring it across. And then once I'm done with this, I'm going to cover it, and then I'm going to let it rest for another 30 minutes. See, I've just shown you, it's not sticking to my hands. Then on my third set of stretch and folds, I'm going to do the same thing. Spritz my hand, get up under there, and stretch it, bring it across, go all the way around with it. And then when I'm done, I'm going to get my big container, and I'm going to set this in my big container. And then I'm going to put the hard top on the container, and I'm going to let this rest for 2.5 hours. This is called bulk fermentation. And this is where you want your bread to stay. You want it in a warm place. You want your bread to stay the dough stay at least 80 degrees, which it typically will. So I'm putting it in this container, kind of mush it down a little bit. I don't push real hard. I just mush it down a little bit. And then I'm going to put a cover on the top of it. I think I put the towel on top, but I ended up replacing it with the red hard cover that goes with this container. And then I'm going to show you on the side what it looks like and where it's located when I've put it in the beginning, and then what it's going to look like when it's ready. So you can see here it's down below that 2 liter mark. and it'll double in size. You'll see some air bubbles in it. You'll see air bubbles on top. And see how it's domed along the top? I'm showing you here. That's the best sign that it's ready. And then you can take your damp fingers and pull the dough from the side of the container, and it'll come pretty cleanly off. If it's really soupy and sticking, it's not ready. So you want to let it, ferment a little bit longer until you get it to look like this. Usually at 2.5 hours, mine's doing good and it's looking like this. So it's easily pulling away. So I'm going to wet my hands. I've got 2 bench scrapers. You only need one, but one's bigger than the other. I like using the larger one, but some people use plastic ones. I'm going to spritz my bench scraper and spritz my left hand since I'm right-handed. And I'm just going to dump this out onto my surface. You see I didn't flour it at all. And it'll stick a little bit, but that's okay because when you're pushing this bench scraper from the front of the dough to the back of the dough and bringing it forward, you're using the tension of that surface to get a tight ball. And that any dough that's sticking on there will eventually grab on and incorporate into your dough. So I'm going to cut this dough in half because I'm going to make 2 loaves. Sometimes I'll weigh it, see how much it weighs. Usually I can get a 900-gram loaf out of this because it usually weighs like 1,800 grams. You don't have to weigh it. You can just cut it where you think you've got half of it. But because I do sell these in my micro bakery, I want to make sure that they're all consistent. So I will typically weigh the whole entire thing of dough and then cut it in half and weigh it so I get it exactly the right amount. And you can see some of that dough sticking on the board, and that's fine because it's going to get incorporated when we're doing our initial shaping. So I'm going to take my damp hand. My left hand is what I'm going to use to kind of guide it around in a circle, and then I'm using my right hand to push my bench scraper underneath it. And what I'm going to do is have my left hand up at the top. I'm going to take my bench scraper and go from the front, and then I'm going to push from the front and twist to the left. Push from the front, twist to the left, and you can see I'm guiding it in a circle. And the more that you scrape underneath it and get that stuff that's stuck on the board, it starts incorporating in with your dough, as you can see. And I'm just doing an initial shape right there. I'm not doing the full final shaping, but I'm just getting it to where I can let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes to develop a skin on top. And now I'm going to do it with the second half of the dough. Spritz my hand, going under, pushing it forward and around, using my hand to guide it around as well. Sometimes I have to keep re-spritzing my hand if it starts sticking too much. But you can see any dough that's sticking to the board is going to end up being incorporated with creating this tension. And then I'm going to get my initial shape here. And then I'm going to let this rest for 20 to 30 minutes before I start my final shaping. So now what I'm going to do, I've missed part of the video. You'll see me do it with the other loaf. But here I'm doing my final shaping on the first loaf, and then we'll talk about it on the second loaf. But I'm using my bench scraper to push and pull, push and pull. Sometimes I just ditch the bench scraper like I did here, and I'm just using my hand because what I'm doing is I'm pushing away from me, rolling it and turning towards me, and using the tension of the surface to create a really tight loaf, because the tighter that skin is, the better spring you're going to get. I've taken a banneton, which is a proofing basket, and I have floured it with rice flour. And then I carefully put this in upside down with the seam on top, and then I just kind of push the seam together. And I'll show you what I'm going to do with those in a minute. But here I take this, and it's got a good skin on top. I'm slowly turning it over. I don't want to deflate any of the air bubbles that are in it. And then I start gently pulling it. So it's kind of like a stretch and fold, but I'm not doing it vigorously like I was before because I don't want to deflate it. So I'm bringing it into a triangle, and then I'm taking a third of it, bringing it down and just kind of sealing it. And then I'm stitching it going up. So I pull a side, bring it across, take a side, bring it across, and I do that all the way up. And then I just kind of pull it and roll it up, and then here I got it into a ball. Now I'm doing the final shaping, where I'm going around in circles, pulling it away from me, then bringing it towards me, using my hand to guide it to go in a circle, and I'm forming that really tight skin on the top. It's okay if it gets those little air bubbles on top. They'll end up folding underneath it, and it doesn't hurt the bread at all. But once I get that really good tight skin, and here I ditched the bench scraper, I'm just using my hands now, using that surface to create a nice tight tension on the bottom. And I'm pushing away from me while I'm spinning it and then dragging it towards me and tucking under. And this one I'm making a round loaf. So now I'm just going to carefully put this in that rice floured Banneton so it doesn't stick when I remove it. And then I'm just sealing up the edge. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these Bannetons or Banneton, however you pronounce them, and I'm going to put them in a jumbo plastic Ziploc bag. And then I put them in the refrigerator, and that's where they're going to sit for 14 to 18 hours. I have let them sit. I pulled them out at 10 hours. They raise fine, not as high as they do if they've been in for 14 hours. And I find 18, 19 hours, they rise just a little bit higher. So I tend to leave them in a little longer now for like 18 to 19 hours. So they're going in. I'm going to zip it. I usually put it, that's an old bag, but I'll tape the top of it and say what time it's going to be ready to be pulled out and baked if I'm making multiple loaves. So after 14 to 18 hours, I'm going to take it out of the baggie, out of the fridge, out of the baggie, and then I carefully put a piece of parchment on top, gently lay my hand on top, gently flip it over and slide my hand out. And there you go, it's not sticking. So that's rice flour you see on top. I'm kind of smearing it around, and then I'm going to sprinkle a little more rice flour on top. It gives it a good contrast when it bakes, and rice flour doesn't tend to burn. Then I'm going to score the bread. If you don't score the bread, it's going to pop open during baking wherever it sees a weak point, and you want to kind of guide it so you get a nice pretty loaf. So you use a bread lahm, and they make several different kinds. So I have this one, and I've already used one side of it, so I'm going to use the other side because I only use one side per loaf so it doesn't drag on the loaf. Here I'm just going in and cutting deeply. I'm cutting in some wheat leaves, going down the other side. And then I'm going to take the lahm, hold it at a 45-degree angle, and go from the top to the bottom in one swoop. And I'm going to go pretty deep. So you hold it at a 45-degree angle, and you don't slice it. You just come straight across. You don't do a shaving motion. Here, I'm going just underneath that skin and giving it a little bit of a cut so I get that nice ear on it. And now it's ready to go into my Dutch oven. I have been preheating my oven at 500 and have my Dutch ovens in there preheating along with it. I tend to let them preheat for an hour. And then I'm cutting the excess parchment off so that when I put my ice cubes in, the steam will come out from around it. I'm going to get my other loaf, and I'm going to pretty much do the same thing. I'm going to take it out of the bag. Just kind of measuring my parchment to see how small to cut it. So these are a couple other loaves that I made after those ones that I just prepared. So these are both batards, which are the oval. And there's the rice flour on top. I'm just going to smooth it around, and then I'm going to sprinkle it with some rice flour. And then I'm going to use my bread lime. And see here, there's a different bread lime. So I have a couple different types. And since this, I didn't feel like changing the blade out of the other one. So I'm using this one because it has a new blade. And I'm just going to kind of do a little bit of a different design on the side. Make it a little curved. Give it a couple of wheat stalks. So I do this before I do that big slice down the middle. When you do that big slice down the middle, it'll tend to spread out and you lose some real estate. So do this part first. You can use scissors. I have some of the bread that you see in the photos. I've just took some dental floss and made some lines, and then so it made kind of ribbons, and then every other ribbon I cut with some scissors. I did it one way on one and the other way on the other, and it makes kind of a cool design. Here I'm holding this at a 45-degree angle, going straight from the top to the bottom. Now I'm just doing a little bit underneath that skin so that I can get my nice ear. So now we're ready to put these into the Dutch ovens. I have my cubed ice ready because I'm going to move pretty quick. I'm going to take out my preheated Dutch oven. And then I'm going to use that parchment and lift it up and put it, oop, you fell over. So I'm going to lift this bread in there, and then I'm going to take those ice cubes and I'm going to use 4 of them. I'm going to put 2 in one corner because they're small ice cubes. I'm going to do 2 in one corner and 2 on the other. And you can see the steam starting to come up, and I'm going to get that lid on pretty quick. I have tried doing lava rocks and wet towels, but I have a gas oven and the steam tends to go out the vent in the back. I've seen where people have sprayed the bread or sprayed the inside of the oven. This has worked great. It creates steam because when you use lava rocks or the towels, you got to take that out mid baking, and this you don't have to. The steam evaporates, the bread does not get soggy, and it creates just enough steam to get that good oven spring. I've used 2. I did kind of an experiment with like 8 ice cubes, 4 ice cubes, 2 ice cubes, because I saw where someone had said too much steam will not let it rise as much as medium steam and a little bit of steam. And the 4 ice cubes tends to be the ticket. So here you can see that steam rising up. I'm putting my 4 ice cubes in, covering it up. And then I'm going to stick this in the oven, 500-degree oven, for 20 minutes. So now, after 20 minutes, I'm going to pull this bread out and I'm going to take the lid off. And you can see the oven spring I got, and it's only been in for 20 minutes. You're going to notice different loaves here than what I put in, which is fine. Was making multiple loaves, and it was depending on if the GoPro was working or not. So here you can see these 2 batards and what they look like after 20 minutes. So I'm putting them back in the oven for 20 minutes so that they can crisp up, get darker. And then here's one where I was doing a round, and I pulled it out and took the lid off. It's always exciting when you take the lid off because that's when you're going to see if it rose or not. And see, it's nice and big. So we're going to put that back in the oven for 20 minutes. Now I'll put it in for 20 minutes. At about 10 minutes, I go in and I spin them around so that they're not darker on one side and not the other. Just with a gas oven, I don't know how it would work with an electric. But then I don't usually leave it in for the whole 20 minutes. I'll sit after I've spin them around. I'll kind of hang in the kitchen and keep eyeballing them because sometimes they tend to get a little too dark. So it's hit and miss. But most of the time, if I leave them in the full 20 more minutes, they're gonna get way too dark. So basically, you just want to bake these so when they look nice and golden on the outside, um, rustic looking, with some little darker pieces, and then that the internal temperature is at least 205 degrees or more. So I wanted to add, when you remove them from the Dutch ovens, take the parchment paper off immediately. Otherwise, it will stick to them, and then you're going to put them on a wire rack to cool. Don't cut into them for a couple hours because they'll get gummy inside. I know it's hard to resist, but you want to wait a couple hours. So here's what they look like finished. You can see where that ridge across the top, that's your ear. And if you look at it from the side, it kind of sticks up. That's kind of classic sourdough. That wraps up our sourdough tutorial. I appreciate you watching till the end. Please like, subscribe, and share. And add any comments below on what you found that helped you make sourdough better. I appreciate all comments. Have a great day.